I dedicated my entire existence to generosity, offering affection, moments, resources, and my very being until one evening at a dining table laden with provisions I had purchased, I overheard words that destroyed me completely. This isn't merely a tale of degradation. It's a tale of enlightenment. If you've ever experienced invisibility within your own residence, this narrative belongs to you. Please subscribe and share in the comments where you're viewing from. I want to learn your narrative as well. I can still recall the sound of crystal stemware, the subtle rhythm of jazz melodies drifting through the residence I financed, the aroma of the roasted poultry I had prepared that morning, cooking gradually while I completed tasks for a meal I wasn't even intended to attend. But I was present because Rachel had neglected to inform me her relatives were visiting again, and the residence needed to appear immaculate again. I should have recognized better than to remain. I should have anticipated what was approaching the instant her mother gazed at me with those partially inquisitive, partially superior eyes and inquired, "And you are?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Oh," she stated, laughing as if it were the most amusing thing imaginable. "That's Patricia, our unofficial housekeeper, maintains the residence functioning." Everyone laughed, including my child. I simply stood there grasping the vacant wine container I had retrieved from the lower level. I smiled courteously as if I didn't sense the ground vanishing beneath my feet, as if my spirit wasn't disintegrating fragment by fragment. I excused myself, positioned the container on the surface, and proceeded gradually to my chamber. They continued laughing behind me. Not one of them, not my own child, troubled to rectify her, to state, "That's my parent," to state anything. That evening, I didn't rest. I sat on the boundary of my sleeping surface, observing the entrance I decorated myself years prior when we initially relocated. I recalled the day I endorsed those lending documents. My identity, my financial standing, my initial contribution. Daniel had just completed university. Rachel wasn't even present yet. They possessed nothing. I provided them everything. And presently I was the housekeeper. The following morning, I prepared coffee as I consistently did. I nourished the feline Rachel claimed to appreciate. And when she descended in her exercise attire, excessively occupied on her device to even state good morning, I stood there and waited. She gazed upward eventually. I presented her the keys. All of them. The primary entrance, the rear, the storage area, the postal container. "What's this?" she inquired, her groomed eyebrow creased. I smiled. Good fortune managing the lending now. She blinked. "What?" I proceeded past her, along the corridor, past the images I had positioned, the furnishings I had selected, the surfaces I had decorated. I didn't take anything. Just my handbag and the garment I'd worn when I transported Daniel home from the medical facility. I didn't even state farewell. I heard Daniel calling my identity as I opened the entrance. I didn't cease. He pursued after me without footwear in the driveway, but I continued proceeding. I didn't forcefully close the entrance of the vehicle. I closed it gently, peacefully, because something inside me had fractured, but not in the manner you assume. It wasn't fury. It wasn't sorrow. It was lucidity. And that was the most frightening thing of all. Because lucidity is silent. It doesn't vocalize loudly. It doesn't implore. It simply comprehends. And I comprehended for the initial time in my existence that I was concluded. I didn't know precisely where I was proceeding, but I knew where I wasn't remaining. The final thing I observed in my rearview reflection was Daniel standing in the driveway, astonished. He possessed no concept how much he'd just forfeited. And neither did I yet. They state you don't realize you were submerging until you finally respire. That initial evening in the modest apartment bequeathed to me by my great-aunt Florence, it wasn't liberation. Not yet. It was silence, substantial resonating silence that established over everything like particles. The apartment possessed the scent of duration. Ancient floorboards, discolored wall covering, a heating device that complained like it had observed superior decades. I deposited my container on the kitchen surface and stood there, uncertain if I was supposed to weep or laugh. I did neither. I simply stood observing the damaged tiles, recalling the residence I had just departed from. But it wasn't a residence anymore. Not for me. Over the subsequent few days, I moved like a spirit. I rested on the seating furniture because the sleeping frame in the chamber was damaged. I consumed peanut spread sandwiches and heated broth. I didn't contact anyone. Not because I possessed no one, but because no one had contacted me. Daniel didn't message, didn't correspond, not a solitary word. I suppose Rachel had instructed him not to. Or perhaps worse, perhaps he simply didn't value. I continued contemplating about that meal, about the manner they laughed, about the manner he laughed. I nurtured that individual alone after my former spouse departed. I relinquished my profession, my intentions, myself. I sanitized accommodation facilities at evening and supplied provisions at dawn just to maintain a covering over our heads. And when my relatives passed and bequeathed me that protection currency, I utilized it all to purchase a residence, a dwelling. I never requested for payment, never made him contribute a single amount. And somehow, in Rachel's interpretation of the reality, I had transformed into the assistants. I commenced composing at evening, ancient spiral journals, the variety I used to purchase for Daniel in intermediate school. I filled sheet after sheet, not for anyone to examine, just for me. I composed things I had never stated audibly, about how I used to stand in the kitchen and await for him to state appreciation, about how I'd weep in the storage area when they'd proceed out to meal and not invite me, about how I claimed to be resting so I wouldn't hear them ridiculing my television programs in the living space I financed for. And then one day, while searching for an illumination device in the upper storage closet, I discovered the ancient metal container Florence used to maintain under her stitching apparatus. Heavy, corroded. I separated it open, anticipating thread and fasteners. Instead, I discovered envelopes, numerous of them, and one in particular that transformed everything. It was addressed to me in Florence's recognizable penmanship, dated nearly 3 decades prior. If you're examining this, it signifies you've returned, and I'm regretful you had to. My spirit accelerated as I separated the sheets. They were discolored, delicate. Inside were duplicates of medical facility documents, annotations, and a solitary photograph of a newborn wrapped in a medical facility covering, not Daniel. There was an identity, Christopher Bennett. I examined the correspondence 3 occasions before it made any comprehension. Florence had been a medical professional at the medical facility where Daniel was born. She stated she consistently possessed uncertainties. She'd observed something peculiar in the nursery the evening I delivered. A final instant chamber transition. A confusion with the identifications. But by the occasion she raised the matter, it was excessively delayed. The infants had already preceded residents. She never informed me. Stated she was apprehensive. Stated she anticipated she was incorrect. But then years subsequently, she discovered a document concealed in her documents, a silent resolution from the medical facility to another family. And that's when she comprehended Daniel wasn't my child. My hands trembled. I assumed I might lose consciousness. I observed at the photograph, at the identity, Christopher Bennett. My mind refused to process it because if this was accurate, who was Daniel? Who was I to him? And then something unusual occurred. I didn't sense sorrow. I didn't sense fury. I sensed liberated. Not because I didn't value Daniel, but because suddenly all those years of suffering, of sensing like a stranger in my own existence made comprehension. Perhaps that coldness I consistently sensed from him. Perhaps it wasn't imagined. Perhaps he consistently sensed like a stranger. And perhaps I wasn't irrational after all. I dedicated the remainder of the evening examining every document in that container. Florence had maintained it all. Genetic examinations, sworn statement, a modest article about the Bennett family, prosperous, educated, regional, and still residing in the same community. My actual child had been here all along, developing just a few miles distant. I folded the correspondences back carefully, positioned them in a new envelope, and put them in my nightstand compartment. Then I gazed at myself in the reflection for a prolonged duration. I didn't recognize the individual gazing back at me. But for the initial occasion in a prolonged duration, I wasn't ashamed of her. She was fractured, yes, but she was awakening. And the reality possessed no concept what that signified yet. There's a variety of silence that doesn't sense peaceful. It senses punishing. That was the variety of silence I resided in for weeks after examining Aunt Florence's correspondence. I didn't comprehend what to accomplish with the information. I transported it inside me like a live cable, hazardous to contact, impossible to disregard. I didn't reach out to Daniel. I didn't proceed searching for Christopher. I simply existed. Each day, I awakened, prepared a solitary cup of coffee, observed out the particle-covered kitchen window, and attempted to comprehend who I was presently. The Patricia who nurtured Daniel wasn't the same individual who examined those correspondences. That Patricia was a parent, a spouse once, a caregiver, a provider of everything. But who was I without that identity? One evening, the heating device went out in the apartment. I illuminated a candle and bundled myself in coverings, positioning myself on the seating furniture with the medical facility documents in my possession. I must have examined them 100 occasions. Every line, every endorsement, every occasion stamp, it all verified. It was authentic. My actual child, Christopher Bennett, was born on the same evening as Daniel, in the same wing in a medical facility that would subsequently resolve silently with another family, anticipating the accuracy would never emerge. Florence had prepared duplicates of everything before she passed. She bequeathed me the fragments of an accuracy that had been stolen from me. I sensed sorrow, but not for Daniel. I mourned the duration, the instances I could have possessed with Christopher, the birthday celebrations, the initial days of education, the damaged knees and science assignments. All those things I assumed I was accomplishing for my child, they were intended for someone else. And yet somehow I didn't sense hatred toward Daniel. My affection for him hadn't been biological. It had been unconditional. Or so I assumed. But when someone you nurture doesn't defend you, doesn't even observe you, it compels you to reassess everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally assembled myself together. I had been concealing excessively prolonged. I wasn't prepared to confront Daniel. Not yet. But I could commence somewhere silent. I proceeded into community and stood across the street from the modest bookstore near Main and Elm. Bennett's Literature. It was decorated in deep emerald with hand-composed signs on the windows. I'd passed it numerous occasions before and never noticed it. He was there. Christopher. I didn't need to inquire. He appeared about 30, perhaps slightly older, well-groomed, examination spectacles. He was assisting a young individual discover a poetry volume. His tone was gentle, patient. His posture was tender but assured of itself. I stood across the street, spirit accelerating, eyes concentrated on the child I never comprehended I possessed, and I wept right there on the pathway, not sobbing, not audibly, just silent, unstoppable tears that rolled down my cheeks and into the collar of my garment. I didn't proceed in. Not that day. I simply observed. And then I accomplished it again the subsequent day. And the subsequent it transformed into a ritual. I'd proceed the block, sit on the seating near the corner, claim to verify my device or consume coffee from a paper container, and I'd observe Christopher residing the existence I was never part of. It wasn't pursuing. It was mourning, but also preparation. Because gradually, I was commencing to position the fragments together. While I sat outside that bookstore, I commenced noticing things. The schedule of provisions, the identities of patrons, the rhythm of the establishment. I was observing, yes, but not just him, them, Daniel and Rachel. I commenced tracking them as well, subtly. I comprehended their patterns from memory. Rachel consistently posted on social platforms, identifying her favorite brunch locations, exercise facilities, and wine samplings. It wasn't difficult to pursue the trail. And what I observed made me nauseous. They weren't struggling. They were claiming. Rachel's enterprise, some lifestyle guidance brand, was primarily smoke and reflections, leased office space, compensated supporters, credit instruments maximized to maintain appearances. And Daniel, he had resigned his position 6 months prior. Rachel called it manifesting a new chapter. I called it delusion. They were constructing a residence of instruments, and they possessed no concept the wind was approaching. I didn't inform anyone what I had discovered. Not yet. Instead, I commenced maintaining a second journal. Not like the initial, filled with emotions and heartbreak. This one was strategic. Dates, identities, enterprise filings, public records. I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was planning. They assumed I was departed, invisible, irrelevant. But I was more present than I had ever been. And I was about to remind them precisely who I was. The initial occasion I observed Christopher closely. I couldn't vocalize. It was a rainy Thursday. The bookstore was nearly vacant, and he was restocking the biography section, humming under his respiration. I had lingered outside excessively prolonged, and when he turned and gazed through the primary window, our eyes met. He provided a courteous, welcoming smile, nothing more. Just the variety of kindness you offer a stranger. And that's what I was to him, a stranger. My spirit clenched. I turned distant rapidly, claiming to verify my device, but my hands were trembling excessively forcefully to fabricate it convincingly. I proceeded rapidly, avoiding around the corner, barely making it to the vehicle before the tears approached. How do you inform someone that their entire existence commenced with a mistake? How do you gaze a developed individual in the eye and state, "You're not who you assume you are, and neither am I"? I proceeded residence and retrieved Florence's correspondence again, examined it 3 more occasions. She hadn't just discovered the accuracy. She had investigated it. The identity Christopher Bennett wasn't a speculation. It was confirmed. She had discovered the resolution documents. The medical facility never informed me because I was never intended to comprehend. And the Bennetts, they must have comprehended something. Perhaps not the complete accuracy, but sufficient to accept a silent compensation. But I wasn't here for revenge against them. I wasn't even assured what I was here for. I simply wanted to comprehend him, to observe if the discomfort in my chest could be filled by the reality of who he was. So I returned. I commenced modest. I purchased a volume. Christopher processed it himself. Good selection, he stated with a smile. Difficult to discover these days. His tone was warm, recognizable in a manner that made my throat constrict. He presented me the container, his fingers contacting mine for a second. I nodded. "You possess this location?" Sort of, he stated. "My relatives assisted me commence. They're retired presently, so I maintain occupied here." Of course they assisted. Of course he possessed support. Not like Daniel, who'd possessed nothing but my blood, perspiration, and sacrifice, and who had turned around and offered me up as a jest. Christopher possessed relatives, but not me, and Daniel possessed me, but never wanted what I provided. The universe had scrambled the puzzle and departed us all suffering over the incorrect fragments. I commenced visiting the bookstore every few days, casual. Sometimes I purchased a novel, sometimes just examined. Christopher began to recognize me. He'd state back again, with that easy smile. We made modest conversation. Weather, volumes, regional events. I never informed him my identity. Not yet. It wasn't duration. Meanwhile, back in the shadows of my ancient existence, things were transitioning. Daniel sent me one message, a text that stated, "Parent, are you acceptable?" Nothing more. After 3 weeks of silence, that's what I received. I didn't respond. I possessed nothing departed to state. But I commenced gazing deeper into their reality. I retrieved the deed to the residence. It was still in my identity. Rachel had attempted to refinance without my authorization. Denied. She couldn't afford the lending. Daniel possessed no income. I could have evicted them on the location, but that would have been excessively easy. No, I needed them to sense the gradual unraveling, the apprehension, the realization that the foundation they stood on wasn't just delicate. It belonged to someone else entirely. Me. Every evening I composed. My new journal was meticulous. Every receipt, every conversation, every occasion Christopher mentioned a hobby, a favorite author, a childhood memory, I composed it down, not to utilize against him, but to comprehend the child I never received to nurture. And in between the lines, I began to observe the accuracy more clearly than I ever had before. Daniel didn't treat me poorly because he was transitioned at birth. He treated me poorly because he selected to. Because Rachel provided him authorization to. Because somewhere along the line, he ceased observing me as someone to respect and commenced observing me as someone to dismiss. But Christopher, he didn't comprehend me at all. And yet he treated me with more kindness in 5 minutes than Daniel had in 5 years. I wasn't prepared to inform him. Not yet. But I was proximate. And when the duration approached, I wouldn't just inform him who I was. I would inform him everything about the medical facility, about the transition, about the existence that was stolen from us both. But initially, I had to conclude observing the collapse of the existence I had already departed behind. Because once the final fragment fell, I wouldn't be gazing back. I never planned to transform into a shadow in my own narrative. But sometimes the only manner to observe people clearly is to step out of the illumination. After that day in the bookstore, things transitioned inside me. Not suddenly, but like a gradual sunrise creeping across a frozen field. Silent. Inescapable. I didn't hurry anything. I wasn't just attempting to reconnect with a child I never comprehended. I was attempting to reclaim myself. I began proceeding a little taller, vocalizing a little stronger. I purchased a second-hand laptop and began typing my annotations into documents, evidence, timelines, identities. This wasn't a diary anymore. It was strategy, survival. And one thing transformed crystal clear. Daniel and Rachel's reality was held together by adhesive tape and lies. The residence they resided in, my residence, was still under my identity. Rachel's lifestyle enterprise, Rachel Ascends, was a fabricated empire. Fabricated clients. Fabricated testimonials. She'd constructed a brand on buzzwords and filters, selling personal development advice while operating a leased luxury vehicle she couldn't afford. I discovered the organization paperwork online. I verified tax records. I gazed up enterprise reviews. Every post she prepared was curated. Every event they attended was a photograph opportunity. And behind it all was debt. So much debt. Maximized instruments. A defaulted private lending. Daniel's student debt still unpaid. They were suffocating under a mountain of bills, but excessively proud to state a word, or perhaps excessively arrogant. That's when I comprehended if I retrieved just one string, everything would fall. But I didn't. Not yet, because I possessed one more step to take initially. Christopher. I still visited the bookstore, and he still didn't comprehend who I was. But each interaction chipped distant at the apprehension. We conversed about volumes, about existence, about modest things, television programs, good coffee, city noise. Once we sat at the tiny cafe adjacent, and he informed me about how he almost transformed into a teacher, but his affection for volumes retrieved him into enterprise. You remind me of someone, he stated once, sipping his tea. Someone I can't position. I smiled. Perhaps a librarian. He laughed. Perhaps. That instant stayed with me for days. I didn't just appreciate him. I recognized him. Not just by the document I had examined or the photograph Florence bequeathed me, but in the manner he treated people, in the manner he listened, the silent strength in him. It sensed like mine. It was in his posture, his calm, his presence. I commenced dreaming about a different existence. One where I'd nurtured him, one where we baked cookies in the kitchen, where I transported him to soccer games and cheered from the sidelines. I could picture it so vividly it made my chest discomfort. But I couldn't proceed back. So I planned for what was subsequent. The initial thing I accomplished was contact a lawyer. Not for revenge, for justice. I wanted the residence sold. I possessed every legal right to it. I prepared the initial contribution, compensated every bill, and never endorsed it over. Daniel had consistently stated, "We'll position it in your identity subsequently. No hurry." Of course there was no hurry for him. I was compensating everything. Presently I wanted my identity back, my rights, my residence. If not physically, then legally. I met with an attorney downtown, an individual about my age, sharp and direct. She listened without judgment. When I informed her what occurred, she nodded gradually and stated, "We'll file the motion this week." I endorsed the documents with a steady hand. That evening, I proceeded past the residence. The porch illumination was on. Rachel was sitting on the swing, scrolling on her device, glass of wine in hand. Inside, Daniel was on the seating furniture, playing video games. Their existences were functioning on autopilot, no concept that the ground beneath them was already transitioning. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about restoring balance. And when the residence sold, they would sense what I had sensed for years, powerless. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd comprehend what it signified to be discarded. I didn't forcefully close entrances. I didn't vocalize loudly. I just observed, waited, and proceeded distant. The initial domino had fallen, and none of them even comprehended it yet. I've consistently believed that silence is stronger than noise, that actual strength isn't in how audibly you combat, but in how deeply you comprehend you're correct. The day the official notice proceeded out to Daniel and Rachel, I was sitting at a cafe near the courthouse, stirring honey into my tea with a calm I hadn't sensed in years. My lawyer stated they'd receive it by morning sharp. My device buzzed. Daniel. I observed at the screen until it ceased ringing. Then I turned it over and permitted the silence vocalize for me. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear his tone. I just wasn't prepared to hear him lie. Subsequently that afternoon, I verified my correspondence and observed his message. It wasn't prolonged. Just, "Parent, what are you accomplishing? Please contact me. Rachel is panicking." Of course she was. The lending was due and presently they couldn't refinance because the individual they assumed was excessively weak to matter was the one holding the deed, and they never observed it approaching. A week subsequently, I received another contact. Rachel, this occasion. I didn't answer her either. She departed a voice message, her tone constricted, barely controlled. "Patricia, we actually need to converse. This is all just it's a misunderstanding. Daniel states you're proceeding through something, and we're here to support you, but you're positioning our existences at risk, and that's not equitable." I listened twice. She called the residence hers, and my silence became sharper, more deliberate. They didn't comprehend yet, but they would. 2 days subsequently, Daniel appeared at my apartment. I observed him through the viewing aperture before he even knocked. Hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes, an individual unraveling. I didn't open the entrance. He stood there for a prolonged duration. Knocked once, then again, then stated, "Parent, please don't accomplish this." I stood on the other side, my hand on the mechanism, but I didn't turn it. I permitted him sit in the discomfort of being unheard, just like I had for years. The subsequent week, my lawyer finalized the paperwork to list the residence. I would receive the complete profit. Every amount legally, ethically, emotionally, all of it was mine. Rachel attempted to combat it. She claimed contribution of value. My lawyer smiled and stated, "Let's observe her prove it in court." She couldn't because she never invested in anything but appearances, and presently those were crumbling, one filter at a duration. Word received out. Rachel's relatives ceased commenting on her social platform posts. Clients began backing out. She prepared a video attempting to explain the unfairness of generational property regulation. People observed through it, and I didn't post a thing. I just continued appearing at Christopher's bookstore. We possessed coffee again, conversed about an ancient novel we both valued. He recommended a memoir to me. It's about sorrow, he stated, but also forgiveness. I nodded, swallowing the accumulation in my throat. I assume you'd appreciate it, he added. Perhaps I would, but not yet. I wasn't concluded mourning or forgiving. At residence, I began boxing up ancient photographs, pictures of Daniel as an infant, school portraits, birthday celebrations where I accomplished all the work and none of the credit. I didn't discard them out, but I positioned them distant because the individual who had dedicated her existence providing everything was departed. And the individual who took her position, she wasn't angry. She was awake. The documents were endorsed. The residence was proceeding on the market, and somewhere inside that Emerald bookstore across community, my actual child laughed at something a patron stated, completely unaware that his existence was about to transform as well, but in the superior manner. Because not all losses are tragedies. Some of them are beginnings in disguise. I consistently assumed masks were something people wore at costume celebrations, but Rachel wore hers like a second skin. Flawless, smiling, unshakable, the variety of individual who consistently comprehended how to pose for a photograph, how to angle her tone just correct in public. But the thing about masks, eventually they fracture, and I was about to shatter hers completely. The concept approached to me one morning while examining the regional enterprise directory. I had already assembled sufficient personal information, credit problems, fraudulent social platform partnerships, late lending compensations. But I wanted more than rumors. I wanted facts, something concrete, something they couldn't rotate. So I hired a regional enterprise consultant, an individual named Marcus. Silent, professional, discreet. I informed him I needed a complete audit of an enterprise. Nothing illegal, just a private deep investigation into its structure. I provided him Rachel's company identity. Rachel Ascend's organization. He received to work. A week subsequently, he delivered everything in a neat folder. And what he discovered, even I wasn't prepared for. Rachel's entire enterprise model was a lie. No tax filings for the last 2 quarters. Several invoices forged to appear like they approached from actual clients. But the clients didn't exist. Photoshoots staged at leased properties she claimed were residence transformations. Her so-called partnerships were just affiliate connections with inflated metrics. She wasn't just claiming to be prosperous. She was deceiving everyone. I inquired Marcus, would this maintain up under scrutiny? He gazed at me and stated, if this proceeds public, she's concluded financially, professionally. And that's when I prepared a decision. I printed everything. Then I discovered the address of Rachel's relatives. The same people who once laughed in my residence, producing wine stemware while their offspring humiliated me in my own kitchen. I mailed them the document anonymously. No correspondence, no endorsement, just a simple annotation on top that examined, everything you assume you comprehend is a performance. 2 days subsequently, the initial fractures appeared. Rachel's social platform proceeded silent. No narratives, no curated morning routines. Her newest post, an inspirational quote about being misunderstood, was flooded with unusual comments. Then, like dominoes, her reality began to collapse. Her website proceeded offline for maintenance. Her last planned workshop was cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. And then I heard the completion from an ancient neighbor who still pursued her. Rachel's mother was observed departing her residence in a fury, vocalizing on the device, face red, handbag swinging wildly. Whatever occurred behind those closed entrances, it wasn't filtered and it wasn't attractive. Daniel contacted me again that evening. I didn't answer. He departed another voice message. Parent, I don't comprehend what's occurring. Rachel's relatives aren't vocalizing to us. Someone sent them materials, documents. They assume we forged them. Did you accomplish this? I didn't respond. He was finally observing her for who she actually was and himself as well. He had dedicated years defending an individual who destroyed everything in her path, commencing with me. Permit him sense it. Permit him sit in it. That evening, I proceeded to the bookstore again. Christopher was closing up. He waved when he observed me. Back again, he stated, unlocking the entrance to permit me in. You should just work here at this point. I smiled. Perhaps I should. We sat on the ground surrounded by stacked paperbacks. He was cataloging a new shipment. I assisted without being inquired. Why do you approach here? He inquired, not unkindly. The inquiry caught me off guard. I gazed at him, actually gazed at him. He possessed my eyes. I hadn't noticed before. I appreciate the manner it senses in here, I stated, like nothing's claiming to be something it's not. He tilted his head, considering me. Me as well. We worked in silence after that. No modest conversation, no more inquiries. But in that silent, something established between us. Not accuracy, not yet, but something proximate, a thread connecting us. And for the initial occasion, I didn't sense like a spirit in someone else's existence. I sensed observed. And the individual who once stood invisible in her own kitchen, she was departed. In her position stood someone they never anticipated, someone they never should have underestimated. I used to assume heartbreak approached in one substantial impact, like a vehicle collision or an entrance forcefully closing. But it's not like that. Not consistently. Sometimes it approaches gradually, like water leaking through a covering, fragment by fragment, until one day the whole ceiling collapses. And Daniel, he was finally standing under the flood. The information had reached him by then. The residence was officially listed. The mask Rachel wore had crumbled, her enterprise exposed, her reputation unraveling, and with nowhere else to point the blame, Daniel accomplished what he consistently accomplished. He approached running to me. I heard the knock before I observed him. It was a silent afternoon. I was just completing a cup of tea when the sound resonated through the apartment. 3 gentle raps, hesitant, like the knock of someone who didn't comprehend if he'd be welcomed or forcefully closed. I opened the entrance gradually. He appeared like he hadn't rested in days, unshaven, thinner than I recalled. Shirt wrinkled like he retrieved it off the ground. Parent, he stated, tone fractured. Can I approach in? I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He proceeded in and stood in the middle of the space like he didn't comprehend what to accomplish with his body. For a prolonged duration, neither of us vocalized. Finally, he fractured. Why are you accomplishing this? He inquired. To us. I almost laughed. Us. As if there had been an us in years. I sat down in the armchair across from him. Calm, composed. I'm not accomplishing anything to you, Daniel. I'm accomplishing something for me. His jaw clenched. You're selling the residence. My residence. I developed there. And you provided it distant, I stated, my tone low. You permitted your spouse turn me into your housekeeper. You observed it occur. You laughed. You never even apologized. He didn't deny it. Just gazed at the ground. I assumed you were just being dramatic, he mumbled. I didn't comprehend it hurt you like that. I observed at him. That's the problem, Daniel. You never troubled to comprehend what hurt me. You just assumed I'd consistently be there sanitizing up after you, compensating your bills, nodding along while you permitted that individual chip distant at who I was. He flinched. Rachel's not who I assumed she was. That's not information to me. He finally gazed up at me. His eyes were glassy presently. I forfeited everything. I didn't blink. No, you provided it distant. Silence stretched between us. I miss you, he whispered. I sat up straighter. I nurtured you, I stated. Nourished you, clothed you, sacrificed for you. And you permitted me be humiliated in the residence I purchased. His lip trembled. I assumed she was assisting me. I assumed we were constructing something. You constructed a lie, I stated. And presently it's falling apart. He stood then, pacing the space. So that's it. You just proceed distant. I received up, proceeded over to the compartment by the kitchen, and retrieved the envelope Florence bequeathed me. I held it in my hands. I'm proceeding to inform you something presently, I stated. And I need you to listen. Actually listen. He nodded, confused. I presented him the envelope. These are your birth records. Examine them. He sat, opened it gradually. His eyebrow creased, then fell. He examined the correspondence, the medical facility documents, the genetic examination Florence had silently ordered after all those years. He gazed up at me, eyes wide. This can't be authentic. It is. You're stating I'm not your child? I'm stating you weren't born to me, but I nurtured you as if you were. I provided you every fragment of me, even when you didn't want it. He proceeded, pale. So who's your actual child? I didn't answer. He sat there, shell astonished, mouth open, sheets trembling in his hands. I don't comprehend who I am anymore, he whispered. Presently you comprehend how I sensed, I stated. 4 years. He didn't weep. Not actually. But something in him fractured. And I observed it occur. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just peace. Because I finally stated what needed to be stated. I preceded him to the entrance. He turned, eyes imploring. Can we repair this? I met his gaze. I don't comprehend, I stated, but it's not my responsibility to attempt anymore. And I closed the entrance gently behind him, not with spite, but with finality. Because for the initial occasion in my existence, I wasn't the one holding it open. It took me 3 days to decide how I was proceeding to accomplish it. I practiced the conversation in front of the reflection, in my vehicle, even in line at the provisions establishment with my hand clutched around a container of oranges, whispering lines I could barely complete. I'm your parent. There was a mistake. You've resided an existence that wasn't intended to be yours. And so have I. But nothing sounded correct. Because how do you deposit an accuracy like that into someone's existence and anticipate them to survive the impact? Still, I had to attempt. Christopher was in the bookstore consistently. The illumination inside fell through the windows in golden beams, softening the shelves and scattering shadows across the hardwood ground. It sensed like a sacred space, a location where accuracy belonged. When he gazed up and smiled, I almost turned around and proceeded distant, but I didn't. Hello, he stated. You approached at the correct duration. We just received a new batch of rare poetry editions. I swallowed the accumulation in my throat. Actually, I stated, I approached to converse. He studied me for a second, sensing something in my tone. Sure, approach on back. He led me through a side entrance to a tiny break space, a kettle on the counter, a mismatched couch, a chipped table. Real existence. No filters. We sat. I've been approaching here for a reason, I commenced, twisting my hands together. I figured, he stated softly. You have. You're not precisely here for the volumes. I provided a small sad laugh. No, I'm not. Then I took out the envelope, Florence's correspondence, the birth records, the genetic proof, and positioned it on the table between us. What's this? He inquired, cautious. Something that's proceeding to transform everything. He gazed at me, waiting. 30 years prior, I stated, my tone breaking. There was a mistake at the medical facility. 2 infants transitioned at birth. His eyebrows drew in, confusion blooming across his face. My child, I stated, was provided to another family. He proceeded very still. And theirs was provided to me. He didn't state anything for a prolonged instant. I nurtured him, I continued. Valued him with everything I possessed. But he didn't value me back. Not actually. His eyes searched mine, gradually connecting fragments I wasn't stating audibly. You assume I comprehend you are. He gazed down at the envelope, retrieved it up with trembling hands. Inside were the documents, the timeline, the explanation, Florence's correspondence with her silent confession. He examined in silence. Every second stretched into forever. When he completed, he didn't gaze at me correct distant. Just positioned the documents down, his fingers still resting on the boundaries like he needed to maintain on to something. "This is substantial," he finally stated. "I comprehend. And you're Patricia?" "Yes." He gazed up, his eyes glassy. "I don't sense anything." "Not yet." "You don't have to," I stated. "I'm not here to inquire for a location in your existence. I wanted you to comprehend. I needed you to comprehend." He nodded gradually. "Why presently?" "Because I couldn't reside with the silence anymore. Because the accuracy deserved to respire." He leaned back, exhaling forcefully. "I possess relatives. They nurtured me well. I comprehend. I value them. I would never inquire you not to." We sat in that tiny space surrounded by volumes and the scent of ancient document and peppermint tea. And I sensed something I hadn't in years. Relief. Not joy, not closure, but the liberation of no longer transporting something so substantial alone. He stood after a while, pacing gradually. "I don't comprehend what to accomplish with this," he stated honestly. "I don't either, but I don't hate you." Tears filled my eyes. "That's more than I anticipated." He turned to face me again. "You didn't have to approach, but you accomplished." "I didn't comprehend how not to," I stated. He nodded again, a silent understanding establishing between us. "Can we take it gradual?" he inquired. "I don't want to prepare this something it's not. I wouldn't inquire for anything else." He provided me a faint, delicate smile. "You want to remain for tea?" I smiled back. "I'd value to." We didn't converse about the documents again that afternoon. We conversed about volumes and weather, and how he hated the sound of wind decorations, but valued the precipitation. And though the past still sat between us, unopened and raw, we had commenced something. Not a relationship, not yet, but perhaps, just perhaps, a beginning. By the occasion autumn rolled in, the leaves weren't the only things transforming. The residence sold faster than anticipated. I received the complete inquiring price, more than I imagined. Daniel and Rachel had to vacate within 30 days. No extensions, no renegotiations. I didn't evict them out of anger. I evicted them out of necessity, because that residence had been my prison for excessively prolonged. And observing them pack up their curated existence container by container, comprehending every cushion, plant, and designer trinket had been purchased on borrowed duration, it sensed like observing a theater arrangement being dismantled. The performance was concluded. The illusion departed. The day the moving transport approached, I operated past. I didn't cease. I just observed from a distance as Rachel barked orders at the movers, her sunglasses concealing whatever remained of her pride. Daniel stood on the lawn, device pressed to his ear, pacing in circles. I wonder if he ever assumed he'd observe this day. I wonder if he comprehended I would be the one to transport it. Their fall wasn't dramatic. There were no vocalizing matches, no scandals on the regional information, but it was complete. Rachel's relatives retrieved their financial support. Her enterprise forfeited every major sponsorship. Her brand, once pristine, was presently whispered about in corners of community. The individual who had laughed at me in my own kitchen presently couldn't afford her overpriced skincare line or daily matcha. Daniel attempted to receive employment, any employment. But with no degree, no references, and no recent experience, entrances didn't open. He moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of community. I heard this from the lawyer. I didn't inquire, but I also didn't celebrate because this wasn't about revenge. It was about accuracy, about consequences. Meanwhile, my existence, silently, steadily, was transforming into something new. Christopher and I continued meeting, consistently casually, coffee, volume discussions, shared articles, and modest comments about existence. He inquired about my composing once, and I informed him I'd commenced working on a memoir, that I possessed a narrative to inform, even if I never published it. He stated you should. Narratives like that matter. He still didn't call me parent, and I didn't anticipate him to. That wasn't the point. We were constructing something, not out of obligation, but out of selection, and that prepared all the difference. One afternoon, we proceeded through the farmer's market together. He retrieved up a jar of apple spread and laughed. My parent used to prepare this every fall. Something about the manner he stated my parent, it didn't sting. It sensed acceptable, natural, correct, because he possessed a parent and I possessed a child who didn't observe me until it was excessively delayed. Some evenings I sat alone with my tea, wondering if Daniel was resting on a mattress or a ground, if Rachel still wore her silk robes, if they gazed at each other presently and observed all the things they disregarded before. I didn't miss them. I missed the concept of what we were supposed to be. But sorrow like that, it's a shadow. It fades modest by modest, and pride that develops, especially when you learn to value yourself more than you valued their approval. I proceeded through my ancient neighborhood one final occasion before the sale closed. Not to haunt it, just to state farewell. I passed the education facility Daniel used to attend, the park where I pushed him on swings, the provisions establishment where I'd count coupons to afford his favorite cereal. And I permitted it all proceed because I had provided everything I possessed to a family that never provided back. And presently I was providing to someone who might never call me parent, but still gazed at me with kindness, with curiosity, with respect. Sometimes you don't need redemption. You just need peace. And I was finally commencing to sense it. It was early November when I received the message from Daniel. Just one line. Can we meet? Just once. I observed at it for a prolonged duration. It had been weeks since I'd last observed him. Weeks of silence, of distance that sensed heavier than any argument we could have possessed. But something about the tone, it wasn't angry or desperate or accusing. It sounded like surrender. We met at a modest park on the boundary of community, the variety with rusted seating and a trail that looped around a dried-up pond. I selected the location because it was neutral. No memories, no spirits. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on seating with his hands clasped between his knees. He gazed up and for an instant he reminded me of the individual he used to be, awkward, uncertain, waiting for direction. I sat down beside him, careful not to sit excessively proximate. He cleared his throat. I'm not here to inquire for anything, he stated. I nodded, stating nothing. I wanted to comprehend. I reached into my container and retrieved out the manila envelope again, the one with Florence's correspondence, the documents, the genetic results. I presented it to him without a word. He didn't open it, just held it in his possession like he'd already examined it 1,000 occasions. I accomplished an examination of my own, he stated. After you informed me. Same result. I nodded again. I dedicated weeks attempting to figure out what to accomplish with it, he continued. And I continued contemplating, if I wasn't your child, then what was I? I gazed at him then, actually gazed, and I stated softly, you were my offspring, but I treated you like, I comprehend how you treated me. He winced. I'm not inquiring for forgiveness, he stated rapidly. I don't deserve it. You don't, I stated plainly. But that doesn't signify I hate you. He turned toward me, eyes wet. Then what does it signify? It signifies I finally value myself more than I value the concept of you. The silence that pursued was substantial with significance. He bowed his head. I assumed I was protecting Rachel, standing by her, but I was just concealing behind her, wasn't I? You permitted her rewrite the narrative, and you presented her the pen. He nodded gradually. I wish I could undo it. You can't. We sat like that for a while. Two people who had shared an existence constructed on a lie, unraveling it in the cold November air. Then he stated something I didn't anticipate. I anticipate he's good to you. I gazed at him, startled. Christopher, he clarified. Your child. A respiration caught in my throat. He's kind, I stated, gentle. He smiled faintly. I speculate some of that approached from you then. We both laughed. Tired, gentle, not joyful, but not bitter either. I don't want to be in your existence if it hurts you, he stated finally. But if there's ever a location for me, just a corner of it. He didn't complete the sentence. He didn't need to. I stood and gazed out at the pond. Leaves scattered like ashes across the surface. I'll contemplate about it, I stated. He nodded. That's more than I anticipated for. As I turned to depart, I positioned my hand on his shoulder for just a second. And that was it, the final instant, not closure, but understanding. And that I realized was sufficient because I didn't need to repair him anymore. I didn't need to be repaired either. I just needed to be liberated. And I was. I actually, truly was. I consistently assumed the word liberation sounded excessively substantial, excessively lofty, like something reserved for vocalizations and parades, not something someone like me could actually reside. But when I turned the mechanism on the primary entrance of Christopher's bookstore that morning, I finally comprehended what it signified. He had contacted me the evening before, stated he possessed something to demonstrate me. His tone was casual, but there was a weight to it, something simmering beneath the surface. I proceeded in and observed him standing by the back surface where a new wooden sign had been suspended above an arched doorway. The sign examined, the next chapter. I smiled. What's this? He presented me a solitary brass mechanism. Small, simple, polished. It's a new section I'm opening, cozy examination space, coffee corner, community conversations. I wanted it to sense like more than just an establishment. I wanted it to sense like belonging. I turned the mechanism over in my hand. And you want me to open it? He gazed at me, serious presently. I want you to possess it. I observed at him. He continued, his tone gentle. You provided someone your whole existence. They treated you like furnishings, like background. But I observe you. I don't need you to prove anything to me. You've accomplished sufficient. Tears welled in my eyes. I blinked them back. You don't have to accomplish this, I whispered. I comprehend, he stated. But I want to. I proceeded toward the entrance under the sign and slid the mechanism into the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, warm illumination filtered through tall windows. Shelves lined the surfaces already half supplied with classics and memoirs. A covering in the center, a worn armchair, a modest table with a tea arrangement. It sensed like a space from a dream I'd forgotten I possessed. I turned around, completely undone. Christopher. He smiled. Consider it yours for however prolonged you want it. I proceeded into the center of the space and stood still, respiring it in, the scent of new wood, document, and possibility. That evening, I sat in the apartment one final occasion, the ancient journal on my possession, the final sheet still blank. I composed. I was an individual who provided until I vanished. Then I transformed into the individual who took it all back. Not with fury, not with fire, but with silence, with accuracy, and with the variety of strength they never observed approaching. The subsequent day, I finalized the donation. A portion of the residence sale proceeded straight to a foundation that supports individuals over commencing again, those dismissed, discarded, underestimated, just like I was. They contacted to appreciate me. But I didn't need appreciation because every occasion I stepped into that bookstore, into the next chapter, I recalled who I was presently. Not Daniel's parent, not Rachel's housekeeper, Patricia Walker, individual, survivor, author of her own ending. I never needed authorization to commence again. Just a mechanism. And presently I possessed it in my hand. And this occasion it didn't open someone else's entrance. It opened mine. Appreciate for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and sense liberated to share your narrative in the comments. Your tone matters.